Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wharton Tech Talks. I'm Manasi Patwa. Today, we're joined by Arjun Arora, who is the founder of FormatOne. FormatOne is a cutting-edge startup consultancy that has driven tactical guidance and strategy enhancements for founders across the technology ecosystem. Prior to starting FormatOne, Arjun was also a partner at 500 Startups, which is a leading technology venture capital firm in the Bay Area that has historically backed pioneering companies ranging from Reddit to Carbon Health and Canva. Prior to entering the investing world, Arjun was also an entrepreneur himself, serving as founder and CEO of ad tech business Retargeter, which was ultimately sold to SellPoints in 2015. Arjun is based in the Bay Area. Arjun, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. To start, you've had a really amazing background. I know you were an EECS, electrical and engineering and computer science major at Berkeley. We'd love to hear a little bit about, at that time in college, what career paths were you thinking about and sort of how did you think about the tech ecosystem at the time?
Yeah, so at that point in college, I think a lot of my friends from EECS were going typically into engineering roles or maybe early product roles. And I had always had a passion for business and was interested in that. I took a lot of classes at the business school, and a lot of my friends were also business folks as well as engineering folks. And so for me in particular, I knew I wanted to kind of combine these two loves. And so I was fortunate to find a role in investment banking right outside of school. And the entrepreneurship thing was definitely meaningfully of interest, though unlike my brother who started his company right out of UC Berkeley, I think for me, I wanted to kind of get into the ecosystem a little bit more, get into the working world, just to understand how things work and learn before jumping into it. So I think for me, investment banking was a great opportunity to kind of continue to work hard, continue to learn a lot, and then kind of really blend those two interests of mine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious, just given the time frame that this all happened in, what were you seeing in regards to your peers' interests and also the job market generally? I assume, in the 2000s, there was a lot of that post.com excitement going on, people sort of rethinking about tech in a really positive way. At the same time, I'm sure there were a lot of opportunities in banking and investing, as you mentioned, to capitalize on that growth. You had a brother who was interested in entrepreneurship. You went the banking route. Was that generally kind of where you saw a lot of the popularity at the time?
Yeah, I think at that point in time, this was kind of 2005, 6 timeframe. And so the market was actually still pretty good. This was right before the Great Recession. At that moment in time, jobs like investment banking and consulting and others were pretty hot. There were a lot of opportunities, and it was kind of a fun and exciting place to go. And then obviously 2008, 2009 came around and things got a little bit tough. Funny enough, that's when I decided to start my company. We'll get to that, I'm sure, in a minute. But I think at that moment in time, there weren't a lot of startups more broadly, I think just generally kind of in the ecosystem, as many as there are now, certainly. And it wasn't necessarily a common path for people, at least out of Cal, at that time to go jump into a company or start a company. It was a bit more of the traditional kind of either big tech or kind of professional services angle. And then for me, that's where I ended up on the latter side of things and on the business side. So that was the state of the world at that point in time, and not too dissimilar to maybe where we were 2 or 3 years ago, though now in this market environment, I think there's a little bit more of you've got to make of it what you can. And it's a great time to actually be in an early stage startup. As someone who's young and willing to take some risk, it's actually a wonderful time to be in the space because those companies that are unit economically sound are definitely going to benefit whenever the market does turn back. So I think a little bit of a different time, but certainly an interesting one nevertheless.
Sure. Sure. And I know a lot of our audience actually might have been in tech banking or is considering entering that. Were you saying kind of a mix of IPOs, private placements, pure acquisitions? And do you notice any major differences between what tech bankers were being brought on for back then versus what you're seeing now?
Oh, yeah. I mean, at that time, it was a nice mix. I mean, literally, I remember working on private placements, very large debt facilities, did an IPO, did multiple M&As in a relatively short period of time. It was busy. And these days, I talk to my other banker friends, it's mostly just M&A work. I think, the IPO market, as we know right now, is kind of dried up. The M&A market in particular is firing on all cylinders. Now, a lot of deals haven't yet been consummated. So I think we're still in the activity phase of whatever is happening. But hopefully there will be some more deals that get done here in the new year. And I think they're certainly ramping up that way, particularly kind of series CD companies that might have fallen on hard times in the last year or so. They may not want to take a down round. The founders may be tired. Options are underwater. There's just a lot of challenges, but now feels like a good time to get out. Now, whether those are going to be necessarily profitable for the later stage investors, TBD, probably not. But at least I think those deals will get done. And I think some companies will find some great homes. So to be a banker, I think in the next 2 or 3 years, if you enjoy M&A, I think is going to be a fun time to be a part of that.
Sure, sure. After banking, you then went on to do business strategy and development at Yahoo.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, it was kind of around the timing of the Great Recession. At the same time, I know Yahoo was a really interesting player in the space, of course, given their size, but they were also engaged in pretty intense add-on M&A to your earlier
Yeah,
point.
absolutely.
Was there anything that surprised you about that role? Would love to hear about your thought process joining them and your role.
Sure. I joined because, as has been a kind of a common thread through my life later, is kind of through the network and through relationships, and was fortunate to hear about this particular role through an old friend. I was excited about the ability to get into the operating world, having been in professional services and a bit more at the kind of macro level and the kind of deal level. I wanted to actually operate. And I think that was just part of my longtime desire to get into the weeds and be in a leadership position, actually do the work, like get my hands dirty, which then happened again and again in a founder capacity. But at that time, I think what I was excited about was the ability to help take an industry that in the past was kind of, for lack of a better term, stuck in the offline world and move it online. I think at the time I was there, even though it was still 2007, 8, 9, kind of around then, people were still just thinking about real estate and selling real estate through newspapers, magazines, literally buying ads on the back of bus benches. And it was an opportunity to help educate a market and get them online and understand the benefits of being online. Now it feels obvious, incredibly obvious, but at the time it was the moment to educate brokerage houses, real estate professionals on the value of the internet. And it was a really fun time to be able to do that.
Yep. And we'll go into your investing career in a bit, but you've seen a number of different business models, different tech company structures, successes, and maybe not so many successes too from the companies you've advised. Were there some characteristics about Yahoo at the time that stood out to you as these are fundamentally great aspects of a successful tech-oriented business, or things that you think they might have been able to do differently that you'd advise a budding entrepreneur or operator to consider?
I think one of the great things was the traffic that was coming, particularly to Yahoo Real Estate at the time. It was the highest trafficked real estate website in the US and probably, frankly, the world at that point in time. The eyeballs on the platform were tremendous. And that was true across the entire site, but especially on the real estate subsection that we were focused on. And so I think there were a lot of reps on kind of advertising and monetization of that asset were kind of best in class for that period of time for a standalone web property. And so there was a lot to learn in terms of both kind of traditional web-based advertising, but also business development and structuring deals with the offline world to bring them online in a way that was monetizable for the asset. That's the stuff that got me particularly excited, was those kind of parts and pieces of the particular business unit that I was in. And then the team was just incredible. I mean, those folks, that alumni group from that team alone has gone on to do some really, really cool things. So that I think is just a reflection of some of the great work of the leaders and the hiring they did at that time. So I think those were things that got me particularly excited. And Yahoo as a whole, I think, was beginning to go through some trials and tribulations, but it was generally in a good place. And I think some of the M&A had worked and some hadn't. And there's many folks who've talked publicly about those challenges that Yahoo had from an M&A integration perspective around that time period. So I won't belabor that point. But I think there was a great asset there, and it was a wonderful opportunity to work on it and grow it. And I think the things to be cognizant of, maybe the lessons to take away from that experience, were finding a small team working even inside a large company that is filled with great people who have a big opportunity is a wonderful place to spend your time, assuming the main entity is at least at a base case level of good, which it was, obviously. That kind of small team worked wonders, and that was a lot of fun to be a part of. And then obviously if the bigger platform is great and the small team is great, well then wonderful, even better. But you can't usually have all the things. It's good to have to pick.
Yeah. And it's a good balance. I like what you said about being part of a big company that's candidly an icon in its field, but still having that small team interaction that's really valuable at the start of your career.
Yeah.
A bit after that, you started Retargeter. We have quite a few listeners that are interested in entrepreneurship and might be working on it during their time at Wharton or Penn. What were the drivers that compelled you to start? And were there any apprehensions you had, leaving a well-established business and
Yeah, I think youthful zeal is probably helpful in that moment. I was relatively young, I think, when I left, maybe 25, 26, something like that. And I'd always knew I'd wanted to do something in a leadership role, in an entrepreneurial role. And for whatever reason, I had known that for probably a decade before. And that just felt like the right time to be able to do that. I had had some few years of experience, had learned a little bit about how the world works, but still had a lot to learn. But it was enough kind of naivete, excitement to kind of just jump in and do the thing. And so I'd had some exposure to obviously the ad world at Yahoo and understood some of the changing and shifting sands of how display advertising was purchased and was frankly going to be purchased going forward. And so that was the opportunity to kind of unpack the retargeter story from there. And yeah, I got excited, jumped in with both feet. 6 years went by and it was a wild and crazy story. And we sold to some of the largest ad agencies in the world. We worked with at the time small companies like Twilio and Uber, who obviously grew from that moment. Hired about, well, over the period of time, lots of people, but had a team of about 50 folks, got tens of millions in revenue over the years. So it was of size and it was a fun ride to say the least.
Yeah, congratulations on all the success. I'm curious, in recent years, there's been a lot of almost institutionalized knowledge on starting your own company. We have a lot of courses and even a major at Wharton to study entrepreneurship. How did you get started? Was it a lot of being a hustler and trying to talk to as many entrepreneurs as possible? Or were there resources that you feel made the difference in making you successful versus not?
Yeah, at that point in time, there just weren't a lot of resources. So it was 100% pure, unadulterated hustle. And I think there were more and more resources as I continued in my entrepreneurial journey. And so whether it was venture hacks from Naval, which then eventually became AngelList, or other content like the First Round Capital Review, which is a stellar piece of content or magazine, kind of e-zine that lives online. More and more of that content kind of came online over time. And now I think today there's, as you said, a tremendous amount of content, which is super helpful. That being said, you can read all day and watch all the videos, but there is nothing that beats kind of experiential knowledge, particularly in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And it doesn't take a lot of experience to begin to learn those lessons. You don't have to go build a massive Series B, C company to start understanding things. If you are thoughtful, paying attention, have good advisors, investors around, and you just start executing, you can then from that place start to extrapolate lessons from all the reading and from your advisors and investors and things like that. So yeah, I think for those who are thinking about starting today, there is a plethora of content out there to think about how to get the genesis moment right for your startup, which is absolutely critical. And then from that moment, I think it's kind of a combination of continuing to execute and then learning and then letting those kind of feed each other so that you can continuously get better as a founder. And now with the content that's out there, the communities that are out there for founders, those things really allow you to accelerate your journey as a founder more so than I think any time in the past.
Yeah, very helpful. There's some entrepreneurs that kind of always have had a passion or they've had an idea, and it's really about getting them to operationalize and execute. Others might want to be entrepreneurs for a number of reasons and might be devising an idea. In your case, Retargeter was focused on the ad tech ecosystem. How did you come up with that idea, right? And what were you noticing at the time that made you think this was a good place to spend time?
Yeah, so I think being at Yahoo and watching, I think it was a Blue Lithium acquisition, was doing things kind of in that space. There were a few other folks around the hoop thinking about this idea and chatting with them about it. Just early kind of advisors, mentors, investors, just other friends from Berkeley who were kind of in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. That was where it was a unique combination of a lot of conversations, like actual experience in the advertising space directly at Yahoo, where this kind of opportunity became clear. And then from there, it was just jump in and get going. And frankly, I think if I were to do it today, I'd do 6 months more research before jumping in to start. But at the time, it was like, hey, I'm doing this, and jumped in and got going. And fortunately, it worked out. But maybe that is what that is. But I think it's always nice when you have some deep experiential knowledge with a market or a customer set, and then from that place, start a company, because it just things can move more quickly. And generally, you have a better sense of at least a starting point of what needs to be learned. But sometimes you just have a lot of conversations and come across an idea that feels like it fits you, where you're willing to learn. And there's a market or a customer base that you want to spend time with that feels like it's resonant. And then again, you just jump in and go for it. You don't have to be working in the space prior to be able to jump in and do it. It just requires even more focus on customer development and really being kind of, we have one mouth and two ears, and really living by that principle when you go into working in a space that you're yet to learn.
Yep. And the ad tech space has evolved a lot over the past decade or so. Are you surprised at all with the direction it's gone in? I looked a lot at like customer data platforms and just
Sure.
personalization. I'm curious if something has stood out to you.
Yeah, no, I think ad tech is one of the hardest spaces to build a business, and it has not gotten easier. As you can imagine, I've invested in a few companies. I'm advising a handful of companies even today that are still in that space. And it is a very challenging, cutthroat space where there's a lot of parties in the middle of any particular transaction. That being said, the market is absolutely massive. It still remains one of the largest markets out there in terms of where spend gets deployed. That being said, it's a tough space. I think it continues to get more regulated, as it should. There's certainly been some issues in the past that require more regulation as it relates to privacy and other things. And there's some places where I would say it's probably been a little overregulated. That being said, I think there are still opportunities there, but the venture dollars going into that space are pretty far and few between. It tends to be kind of former ad tech operators supporting each other as early investors. And then the good thing about ad tech is you can quickly get to revenue and sometimes even be profitable with a little bit of an early investment. And then, of course, there's still VCs out there that fund it, but you've got to be playing a very big game and have a phenomenal team to kind of raise venture dollars in the ad tech space. So I'm still somewhat close to it, but it's not a place where I spend a lot of time these days.
Sure. And sort of to close the loop on your entrepreneurial journey, you were able to sell the business, which is a great success. I'm sure now as an investor, you advise a lot of founders on exit timing and deciding what exit paths should look like.
Yeah.
How did you in the founder seat navigate that, both who to sell to and also just timing, going down a different route, raising more capital and so forth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think indicative of that issue of raising venture capital for an ad tech business, it was hard before, it's hard today, it was hard then. And so I think just having a real frank look at what the growth trajectory would need to be in order to raise capital and how much capital would need to be raised at that point in time, and some other kind of competitive dynamics. There were a bunch of factors at play that said, okay, does it make sense to sign up for another 5 to 7 years and kind of slog it out and maybe raise a little bit of money just to build what's necessary to kind of get going? So I think at that time, given all of those factors, it was clear that it was the right decision to kind of sell the business. And that's when, fortunately, another, I think, interesting insight from that is that it often tends to be partners or business development deals that you do where there's already a pre-existing working relationship that then allows it to be easier to sell the business. So we had kind of a BD relationship with Sell Points prior to the acquisition. There was revenue flowing, there was comfort with the teams, and kind of towards the middle or end of the process, just out of fiduciary responsibility, we're like, hey, just as a heads up, we might be selling the business here shortly. And they said, hey, wait, we need to put in a bid. And that's kind of how it happened. So I think building those relationships and having true kind of partners where you co-market, build together, sell together can be really helpful in a M&A situation where things might be challenging either from a market perspective or either a micro or a macro market perspective. In either case, it can be helpful to have those sort of BD deals in place.
Absolutely. And then switching a little bit into your investing career, you were at 500 startups, where I'm sure you got to work with a number of really exciting brands. From the founding teams you looked at and ultimately invested in, were there any major differentiating factors that you felt were pertinent kind of at that pre-seed and seed stage?
Yeah, I think it ends up being about, is this a truly venture investable business? I think is one of the key important factors. And for that to be true, you really need to be in a massive market and have the ability to scale quickly. That ability to scale quickly may not happen immediately, and it usually doesn't, but there is an opportunity that if everything got built right, if the GTM motion is clean and clear, then the company can grow with speed and truly accelerate. And so that's what ultimately looking for at that side in a massive market. And then, of course, there's a much longer set of things to share about the founder side and kind of how do you find a founder that, a friend of mine shared this with me recently, has an endless nuclear core just pulsating with energy that runs through their system at all times. That's kind of the metaphor for who you're looking for. Incredibly gritty, bright, just kind of pushing things forward at all times and kind of relentless in their drive to build their vision. And so I think that is something on the people side that I think is incredibly important, especially at the pre-seed stage, coupled with obviously thoughtful strategy and being in a market that makes sense and all the other good stuff.
Yeah. And one question that I hear a lot from budding founders is, do I need a co-founder? Sometimes maybe that's truly, did I come up with the idea with someone else or not? But I think they're always curious on the investor's perspective. So from your standpoint, is it a positive to have a co-founder or multiple co-founders? And if someone's a solo founder, how can they articulate that they are, at least at that moment, sufficient to succeed with the business?
Yeah. Generally, as a general statement, and there are exceptions to this everywhere, it's good to have a co-founder and maybe sometimes two, but generally at least one. And there needs to be a kind of a very clear delineation of responsibilities. And I think that's where understanding the sector or the area where the other co-founder is best in class and is laser focused so that the other founder can focus on their section and there's really high throughput communication between the two parties is absolutely critical. And if you can get that, then wonderful. If you can't, then it's probably better to just be a solo founder. Or if you, for whatever reason you don't want to, or that isn't aligned at this time, that's all good. And I think with solo founders, then you have to really understand their leadership potential and capability and ability to delegate efficiently and effectively, because it's just not possible to do all the things themselves. And they need to have enough of a grasp of both the kind of technical and product and the sales and the go-to-market, and need to be able to speak articulately about each of those spaces. Now, they don't have to do the work. They don't have to be a salesperson if they're deep in engineering. They don't have to code if they're a salesperson, but they need to know enough to be dangerous and then be thoughtful about delegation. So I'm, as having been a solo founder, like I'm less inclined to be against that, so to speak. I know some people are, but I think it's totally possible. You just have to be hyper aware and from a self-awareness perspective, and then just do the work. So, yeah.
Got it. And when you were at 500, I'm sure there was probably a range of criteria you were using to evaluate not only the founding team, but the idea, maybe any initial materials they had put together. Did that criteria change at all during the years? Of course, it was a great time for tech generally,
Sure,
but
yeah.
were there items you indexed more towards at the end versus the beginning?
In the very, very early days, having kind of just come off my own entrepreneurial journey, and this is a story that happens for investors often that have been former operators, is like, oh yeah, I could come in and kind of fix this or that, or make this move, or help direct a company in this way. And over time, I'd say relatively quickly, maybe in 6 to 12 months, I was able to fortunately let go of that and really look at the company standalone. It's like, as much as all the investors want to be value add and be helpful, at the end of the day, the company has to be able to stand on its own 2 feet. And that's really important. Doesn't mean an investor shouldn't help. Frankly, they very much should, and they can help take something that's amazing and make it even better. That being said, that's an important part that might have changed in terms of my particular perspective. I think also maybe over time, continue to have an even deeper appreciation for the value of the market that a company was playing in, that it is truly of size. And I think those are probably the two takeaways. And then I think just continue to get reps on the pattern recognition around what makes a phenomenal founder and that kind of energetic imprint of extreme hustle and focus and grit and intelligence and IQ and EQ and that whole package. I think just seeing more awesome founders just builds that pattern recognition over time.
Great. And now you kind of founded another enterprise through FormatOne. How did you come up with the idea? And was it partly through what you were seeing founders struggle with, what they needed when you were an investor?
Yeah, you nailed it. I think that's exactly it. I think there's a unique kind of gap in the market in which there isn't a neutral third party that can be highly value add to founders, but not be an investor or another early employee or something like that. And so having that kind of almost Switzerland-like neutral third party, but yet who can add value, be strategically thoughtful, understands the venture game, understands how capital flows from the LP to the VC to the founder, and be tactically helpful in all the ways, whether it's fundraising or hiring or strategy, but not be on your cap table. And I think that subtle insight is, I think, a really important one, because whenever someone is on your cap table, there is understandably a sense of kind of obligation that comes with that, and it changes the dynamic of the relationship. Now, not every investor is like that, and there's some rare gems where they can make that distinction clear. But even great investors will say it directly, and we're fortunate to get referrals from great investors all the time who understand that there is a lot of value of just having a neutral third party that isn't on your cap table as an investor there to be supportive. And so that's been, I think, really important. And then just getting tactical and getting in the weeds, right? I think that's the other thing where some advisors are super light touch. And I've been that advisor in a past life because I was working on other things. And there's a lot of value there. But it ends up being once a month or once every 6 weeks where you get a kind of a moment of engagement. Whereas having an advisor or someone who's more tactical meet with you on a weekly basis just allows for more work to happen, more things to get done, more documents to be reviewed, more fundraising processes to be supported, whatever kind of happens. So I think those are some of the key insights into how and why we exist. And I think why we've been successful is because we've been able to focus on that gap in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. And as part of that, are there any technology trends or subsectors that maybe either a lot of your clients are focused on or that excite you in particular based on what you've been seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think being at 500 Startups, very much a generalist and fortunate to have clients everywhere from the nexus between fintech and health all the way to kind of heavy industry and vertical SaaS and consumer or payments, a lot of fintech, licensing for UGC content. It's a pretty wide array of things. I'd say it's all kind of generally at the application layer, generally tends to lean B2B. And then obviously software and some deep tech as well, but mostly like 90% software is kind of where I spend most of the time.
Yeah. And we always hear SaaS is king. And I believe that from my investor life.
Sure. Yeah.
Are you seeing people being more experimental with business models, especially in the B2B tech space, right? Like I remember I was seeing a good mix of transactional and SaaS or blending in a lot of managed services on top of a SaaS layer. Is that something I'm curious if you're noticing that?
Yeah,
too?
I'm highly partial to the 3-part tariff model, the 3PT model, which is a combination of SaaS plus transactional. I think to the extent where that is a credible model to use and isn't just forced in because investors like it, I think that's pretty exciting. I'm seeing more companies being able to find ways to genuinely and authentically leverage that model. I think a little bit of transactional, but it's hard for all the reasons around predictability and kind of the ability to stack cohorts and churn related issues and things like that. So if it is true value add software and you've really solved the problem, you should probably be able to charge via SaaS. And then the fintech space is fascinating as well, because I think there's a lot of other ways to monetize. There was a whole host of kind of lending and different models in the past. And some people have made money just by sitting on float, of capital that goes through a system. Those are some other unique models I have seen out there. But at the end of the day, I'm probably still partial to SaaS. So all that being said, it is just still such an epic business model, especially when it works. So yeah.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, great. As you know, we usually end each podcast with a couple of rapid fire fun questions.
Yeah.
So we can get started. To start, do you prefer coffee or tea? And depending on that, is there a go-to spot you have here in the Bay?
Yeah, strong coffee. Yeah, I think there's an old movie sometime. I wear black and drink coffee and operate. And that's just kind of how I go. So many places, Phil's, Equator, Blue Bottle, Red Bay, they're each unique in their own way. And I can go into why they're all awesome in their own unique way. But those are some off the cuff. Got to give a shout out to.
I do wish we had a Phil's on the East Coast. I'm sure it would be a fan favorite.
Yeah, Phil's is great.
And then what's been your favorite movie of all time?
Oof. That is a real tough one. Yeah, I'd probably say The Godfather, just because it covers so many nuances of business, power, politics, familial relationships. There's just so many narratives weaved within there and so many archetypal human stories that are reflected in that. That one would probably be it.
Sure. And then if you could live in any other country, where would you choose to go?
This is a tough one. I genuinely love the Bay Area and I love living here, and this is probably the place I'd be. But if I had to pick another country, I've spent a little bit of time just across Europe more broadly. I think some of the major key city-states are probably of interest. So, I think I like places like Dubai or Abu Dhabi or Singapore or potentially London or Berlin or Paris. And Tokyo is another one. So sorry for all the answers, but I think those kind of core city-states where there's a hub of activity, innovation, kind of flow of capital, those are the places where I think there's some excitement for me personally.
All great options. And then to close it off, aside from our Tech Talks podcast, do you have one that you go to that's maybe part of your morning routine?
Yeah, I love conversations with LPs in particular. So there's a couple of new LP-focused podcasts, one from Samir Kaji at Allocate, and then another one from, I believe it's the Turpentine VC folks. So those are the ones where I think LPs have a unique macro perspective given the conversations they have with funds. I find those conversations to be really enlightening and fascinating to kind of see things from that vantage point.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Arjun, for joining us. This has been a really incredible conversation. I'm sure our audience base of entrepreneurs and investors alike will really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for having me. Really happy to be here and look forward to connecting with folks online.
Thank you.